So we'll call our existing speakers for the morning up, Sarah, Roy, Chris and Roger too. Ed, I might have to ask you to sit on the other side of the room for a sec as I commandeer your chair, if that's all right. Thank you. Oh, just two more. Second microphone's working. So I'll leave one microphone here with the speakers, and if you've got a question, just raise your hand and I'll come and see you. Yeah, you're going to do it? Man, it's just so friendly. And I'll leave the microphone here at the table. Anyone got a question straight up?
My question comes back. I'm not quite sure who's best positioned to answer this one, but again, we see our present speakers talking a great deal about things which can and have been. If you're on board, you're listening. Who do we talk to and how do we talk to them in the federal government? Because I think without the federal government, the big blockages won't be removed, and I don't see them listening. I could be entirely wrong here, I could be desperately biased, but I don't think any signals back that they give a damn about electric cars. So, who will tell them?
I'll give it a go. On the positive side, I would say that the EV Council is talking to the federal government. I'll talk about some actions that are happening. If you follow the news, I would say that there's extensive additional lobbying and pressuring being put in the background. Just over the last 6 months, you've probably had every major vehicle supplier publicly talk about how the lack of effort by the federal government in this area. And so the pressure's there, but ultimately today I would say it is probably not high up on the federal government priority list. Does it need another election and a new government to come through? Maybe. Maybe that will be part of the answer. It's the way our parliamentary system works here. And but I will say that there is work being done in the background, and maybe Climate Works can talk about what they're doing.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit further. So I guess there's a few things that we see the federal government as being able to do in this space. One is vehicle emission standards. So at the moment there's standards for like noxious emissions from cars, but there are no standards for carbon dioxide emissions from cars. And the federal government is currently considering implementing carbon dioxide emission standards for cars. And the option that they've proposed is actually the most stringent one of the ones they put forward originally. So we're really hoping that that one gets up. That's supposed to be considered this year, but looking a bit unclear at the moment whether that's actually going to happen. But that's kind of where most of their transport emissions energy is going at the moment. The other two that we're thinking about that the federal government has control over are fringe benefit tax and luxury car tax. So we're also talking to them about that, but yeah, at the moment it's most of their energy is in the emission standard space.
Sorry, I forgot to mention one area where there is actually investment happening, and that's through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. And I encourage anyone to look at their website and all the billions of dollars they're investing, and transport and electrification of transport is now one of the CEFC's primary targets for investment. And yeah, indirectly it's a vehicle of the government to put money into it, and Clean Energy Finance Corporation has certain, obviously, financial reasons how they do their investments, but even a few weeks ago they invested in a company called Re-Electrify in Victoria that's looking at how to refurbish batteries, etc. So the CFC is certainly putting a lot of effort into transport.
The only other thing I might add is that there was a changes to the Motor Vehicle Standards Act 1989 were proposed, and the one that we were all hoping would get up was the allowing of parallel imports from right-hand drive countries. That wasn't supported. So there was an exception made for low emissions vehicles, but only low emissions vehicles that weren't already made here, like the Nissan Leaf, for example. So you wouldn't be able to say import a new Nissan Leaf from Japan or even New Zealand under the current legislation. So when they had the chance to do something really basic, they still didn't support that one. Disappointing.
John, could I just say something? Thank you.
Right, you're the last man standing.
Yeah, only man standing. The difficulty that you've got is that you're a pioneer. You're part of a group of people who are pushing for a change in the order of things. It's not going to be easy. Yeah? If it was going to be easy, you wouldn't be here. You'd be out driving your electric vehicles around the country, and it would all have happened already. You've got to, your question is, who do you speak to, who do you ask? You've got to speak to everybody, and you've got to use a lot of different tactics. There is gratuitous advice here. Don't just rely, as a relative minority of drivers and users of the roads at the moment, don't rely on convincing government to tax everybody else to do, in order to push them to do what you're doing. Politically, it's not very attractive. It is an effective mechanism, and if you're China, you can just do stuff like that, like what we saw before. But there's other things where it's sort of good not to be China, and to have a slightly more democratic approach. So one of the things, whilst yes, you need to pull those levers and press those buttons, I think one of the other things that the electric vehicle movement can do, and we've seen evidence that you are doing, is make friends with other people who aren't seen to be propeller-head enthusiast minority groups. Get other people aboard who look more mainstream, ordinary, who represent a bigger footprint of people and interests, and therefore you've got a larger block that you are providing a voice for, which may not be all of where you want to get to, but you are showing that there is a broader acceptance and a demand. So again, I would say, use every opportunity you've got, press every button, pull every lever, but consider that in the mix, things that are pull as well as push, and that are about showing that there's demand rather than just providing incentives or penalties to overcome a lack of demand for things. And I think then if you've got all of those in your repertoire, you're going to find more people who are prepared to walk the journey with you.
Hi, Shane Harkness, native of Tasmania. Two things that struck me this morning was the idea that we have to bring 500,000 Tasmanians along with us. I thought that was really noteworthy. And then I seen the synergy with one of the three big blockers was public awareness. And then I remember that the state government has actually just funded a large group of new buses. And it's the low income people who are going to use those buses, and if they were electric, you'd go a long way to starting to change that awareness. And then you have other simple little projects like the ferry on the Mersey. Perfect opportunity for an electric ferry boat. There must be more in Hobart. So would anyone like to speak to that, please?
I'll start that one. The good news is that the first of those buses is coming out of the factory on next week sometime in Wynyard. Those buses have been designed to use a diesel power plant at the moment, but they've been designed for that to be swapped out and batteries and electric put in. When the complementary services and infrastructure, and within the lifetime of the build of those vehicles, which have been fabricated in stainless steel for long life, we're building 100 of those here on the northwest coast, and they're designed to take electric power plant as a retrofit. So that's in our minds. Ferry on the Mersey, already struggles a bit, but you're right, it could be a billboard for all of our visitors who come in who see that vehicle, if it's got a promotion opportunity. But I think you're right. We need to educate people, and perhaps even the bus type idea is a beauty, because without ramming it down your throat, you could have just something small inside that says, "Did you know that you're on electric vehicle? You didn't have to choose it. You didn't have to have an epiphany before you got on. You just paid." And yeah, the marketing is very important.
Like fleet that you're doing, but you know, one in Hobart, one in Launceston, this is what's coming, you know.
No, I hear you. I'm happy to take that message back to Mr. Hickey. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks, Roger.
Sorry, just a simple question. EV figures which you put up for take-ups in foreign countries, are they just passenger vehicles, or they include bikes and mopeds and all sorts of things?
Yeah, those ones were just passenger vehicles. For China, the number of bikes and for smaller vehicles is much larger.
Yeah, I was there last year and there's about 100 mopeds for every electric car. They're everywhere.
Yeah, just focused on passenger vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
When I'm president, the first thing we'll do is make my BMW motorcade electric. Tammy, did you have a question?
Hi, Tammy Milne from I'm an alderman on the Devonport City Council. Now, I'm really interested in what's going on today. Now, I get taxis regularly in Devonport, and the taxi company are hybrids. So they use both petrol and electric, so the revolution is already here. Big companies already coming on board. I got an Uber in Hobart, it was hybrid. So that's great that the revolution's here. People want these things already, but now I had a quick Google and I found that I can buy a second-hand Nissan Leaf 2012 for $28,000 from Western Australia. So I can do that now. I just did that on my phone. The thing is, I googled then where I could find a dealer in the northwest coast or even Tasmania. I can't. Okay. So I went to a conference just earlier this year in July, and one of the leading car dealerships in the state was there, and he said something like, "Who wants to buy an electric car?" Because he's not selling them. So how do we get those people on board to actually get those cars here? Because there is a market. People are already buying the hybrids. Why, let's push it a bit further and get the availability. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can quickly answer that. Some dealerships are fantastic and others aren't. Unfortunately, in our experience, at least in the West, the majority aren't. BMW have been absolutely fantastic. They come to every electric car, they come to every show, they'll donate a vehicle anytime you want. If they've got the i3 available, they'll let you have it. But as I said, Nissan on the other hand, total opposite experience. And when pressed, they'll basically say, they don't make us any money. We make most of our money repairing cars that fail, and your EV won't fail. So that basically eats into our business model. So now this is a fantastic thing that we push to the consumers and say, well, stuff the dealer, at least you're going to get a reliable car. So yeah, I think there's good dealers and there's crap ones, and I think unfortunately we have to educate them as well, because ultimately if someone walked into a dealership and said, I'd like to buy an electric car, it'll be the dealer who talks them out of it.
Just so pleased that I might have found my next career as a used electric vehicle car salesman. You had a question, David?
I did, but I think Tammy, was it? Yeah. Pretty much covered it. Yeah, David Camp from Adelaide. I drove my Leaf here. I'd like to trade it in, but I can't. So it's impossible to buy an electric car in Australia. You can buy a BMW i3 or you can buy a Tesla if you're lucky enough to do that. The 500,000 people that Roger spoke of that can't buy one of those, can't get one. They could have my car if I could buy a new one, but that's the way to get cars to people, is the second-hand market. And my car's ready now if you want to get me a Nissan Leaf here, and we don't have one, and I've been waiting for years.
sorry, I'll just comment a little bit. So when we've been thinking about this model availability issue, so as you saw in Roy's chart, there's not a lot of models available in the lower price range in Australia at the moment.
None.
And
None.
pretty much none.
Not many, there's none.
Yes, so
You can't buy an electric car in Australia.
Yes.
It is madness.
No.
We have this, lots of people talking about what to do. We have a committee set up to do things. You can't buy a car.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Agreed.
It's madness.
Continuing, so we think that one really potentially useful way of getting more models into Australia is through government fleet. So fleet purchasing is a really large portion of the Australian market. It's about 50%, so that's company and government is a portion of that. And so we think that there's an opportunity for governments to lead the way in that space by, because they buy so many cars, having some type of joint procurement exercise where they get together and they say, in total we can buy this many cars, and then go to a manufacturer through potentially the Electric Vehicle Council and say, what can we do if we can just buy this many cars? And that's potentially a really good way to get new models into Australia, and then to get those flow-on benefits to the second-hand market, because government fleets turn over their cars in 2 to 3 years, and so you'd expect those vehicles to show up in the second-hand market pretty quickly. So, yeah, working on it, but yeah.
I come from probably a little bit of a sport background, so I'm very lucky to have a Tesla. And it's probably part of the problem that Tesla owners are probably given a bit of a bad rub, because I've had to make a lot of sacrifices to get my X, and I don't make any pretense about that. It wasn't easy. I had to sell a lot of stuff to get it. But I see it as a long-term thing to show people what they can do. I don't pretend, whoever I talk to about that, it's for everybody. But I think I got to Devonport on one charge, which is, like I know a lot of guys would dream of that with their lease. It just doesn't happen. But I think that something that's worth pointing out is that as an owner, you see a lot of charts saying, you need a fast charger, you need you to be able to, they're always looking at the sort of charge rate. If it's not fantastic, think, oh, it's not worth it. But I don't need, this is me, I know it doesn't mean, leads need to get to the next charge point, but for me, even a 3-phase socket, which is probably worth less than $100, $40, makes a massive difference, because all I need to do is get home. I don't need to fully charge it before I head off. And that's something I don't think people will appreciate. That's just testers. I don't pretend it's for the smaller battery cars, but if we can get get chargers out there, all our problems are gone. Because I see the range anxiety, the cost savings. People see chargers around and they say, oh, that's free to electric cars, I want a bit of that. And they think, oh, we're paying in the multi-story car park with their normal cars. And the kids see it and say, oh, why do they get it for free and we don't, Mum? And they sort of raises that conversation. And I think another point is that Tesla has put a lot of money into infrastructure. And I hear sort of a pass-away comment, oh, they look after their own. And I see myself as part of a club with Tesla, and I'm lucky, and I don't pretend it's easy, but they look after their own, and I'm very proud of being part of the club. And I've subsidised the Model 3 production, which is hopefully going to come soon and be a real game changer for, hopefully the suppliers can get up. But when they do, that's going to be a no-brainer for people to choose. But as a government, the infrastructure has to go in well ahead of when they arrive. And that's what makes me frustrated, is that we're still talking about infrastructure. The AEVA has come up with $500,000. It's good that, it's great to hear that there's almost equally now, where I thought the grant was being denied, which maybe it's backpedaled a little bit, which is great to see. But I came here almost tense. I was ready to have a go at anybody, because I thought, I feel part of the club. I know everyone feels it, but I'm a bit, wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit.
Any question, Michael? What's the question?
When are the charges going to go out that the AEVA have got the money for, and we need TAS networks and great people like Paul to say, here's a kit to get power off a transformer on a line, drop it down into these spots. It can't be too difficult. And I get sick of talking. I'm an industry where I just do it. And I guess I'm not very patient. That's why it's all platitude to me, all facts. And I'm not one for just saying, well, we're going to go back to these people. And then it gets diffused and so nothing happens. It was 2 years the AEDA had their first meeting, and Roger Green came along. He was saying all these same things then. 2 years, it's 2 years wasted, where we could have at least the 11 charges that we're pre-funded for already out there.
The working group will tell us what and where and when with those. Definitely, that's what their job is. They're convened now. They've met. That's their job to do. I don't know what their time frame is, but assuming, as you know from the list that I read down, there's lots of people in there who've got their heart in this to get it right, and who will be bursting to get those dates and those maps out. Yeah. Speak to Clive.
Okay, my name's John August. I'm with EVA New South Wales. So one thought about what we've been saying about availability of vehicles, that I think there is old money and new money, and if you talk about new money, and rather than the obstacles you're saying, but basically sell these cars as being low maintenance and use that as a point of difference for a specialist car retailer. And I'd like to think there's an opportunity for new money, not old money. There's a very big distinction between new and old money. But I will try to develop a bit of a question for Sarah about some of the details of China. Now, way back when in Sydney, there were problems with photochemical smog. There were emission controls that fixed that up. That goes back decades. But I'm wondering, for China, how much is driven by climate concern and how much just by urban pollution?
Yeah, I think largely driven by livability issues. So they do have really bad smog rates, and that's driven a lot of their climate policy, not just in electric vehicles, but in energy generation more broadly. And yeah, I think they like that gives them the opportunity to present themselves as a leader in terms of climate, but I think the political situation and the fact that citizens are really concerned and get together and lobby government about pollution is what's actually enabling the environment that lets them have these policies.
The EV shop coming soon to Devonport. We should be teaching our children how to service the cars too. James, did you have a question?
Comment more than a question. James Kennedy from Tridium. On the availability issue, I think probably you've all heard that GM said they're not bringing a Bolt here, but they told us just earlier in the week that if someone wants to order 1,500 of them, they'll bring them into the country. So a group buy time maybe, I don't know. But I have no idea.
So we'll be taking orders out the front. Did someone at the front want to respond to that?
We'll take down a list of names, without a doubt.
Graham?
G'day, Graham, convener for the AVA Tourism Branch. My question is to Roy. Roy, is there any reason why the AVA wasn't invited to be part of the Electric Vehicle Council, or is there anything stopping it from being invited to be?
Oh boy, that's a doozy. There's nothing to stop the AEVA from being part of the Electric Vehicle Council, but I'll pass that direction, the message clearly on to Bayad. Look, to be honest, AEVA is predominantly funded by corporations, but I'm not sure if there's a class of membership for associations, so that's certainly a good question to be asked, and I'll get back to you on that.
Hold on, Mr. Harkins. There's a gentleman way over there behind Dick Friend. We'll go with Dick first. Dick does.
Thank you. Roger, I was interested in your talk about the advantages in Tasmania, how important it is for a variety of reasons, the use of renewable energy. Isn't the most important thing here is reduce all that money that outflows on fossil fuel energy and oil? And you haven't mentioned that. And I think that it's not only the most important thing for the economy, a big plus, to reduce that and maximise the use of our own Tasmanian generated power. But so I think the point is, it's not only just really important for the economy, and a great plus for the economy, But isn't that the greatest selling point that you've got?
Definitely.
Why didn't you mention it?
There's interest. I thought you all got that already.
But it's not mentioned. You just don't hear people talking about replacement of expensive substitutes being brought from great far distances when all the energy's here.
Yes.
Most important.
Fully agree.
We have some representatives from New Zealand here from ChargeNet. Clearly New Zealand is a leader in that area as well, and I encourage you to follow the news about what New Zealand is doing, and I think it's a great reference for Tasmania, and hopefully New Zealand ChargeNet will be talking about that when they're speaking. Just one other comment though, and this is where all the policy issues are all very important and all need to be brought together though. Road pricing is another policy issue that is being discussed in the background, and it's not as simple as, it's not always a black and white issue, and clearly fuel excise taxes are used to fund roads, and clearly road pricing needs to be tackled as an issue as the electric vehicle uptake increases. And there's no right answer or wrong answer, but everybody should be aware that all these issues will need to be addressed.
Good morning, everyone. Chris Nash, I'm the chair at the Vic branch. Roger obviously identified earlier that membership is quite an issue. Could I just see a show of hands of how many members, paid up financial members, we have in the room? Excellent. So Roger, maybe I could start with you and ask, would you like to become a paid up financial member?
I'd be mad not to.
Thank you. Sarah, I think you're next in line.
Sure.
Very good. I'll leave it with the other branch chairs to follow up other people in the room. Someone lock the door, please.
And you get a free leaf.
And then I'll make it 500.
Who's a refugee from back in the 70s when we were all concerned about these issues and whatever. My immediate question is to our government representative, and it's about rail, because rail always was the overall cheapest, most efficient way of transporting stuff around. It doesn't even need a road. A couple of weeks ago I came up to a sustainability conference here in Launceston to explore hempcrete and its availability because of its very, very low carbon emissions and its value appreciation and logistics and that. And I was told that it's fine if you live in Devonport, and it's okay if you live in Launceston, but forget it in Hobart because it's a transport issue. It can come across here quite easily. And then no trucks are involved. And by the time you add that in, the carbon emissions that you saved by going for hempcrete instead of normal concrete, you spent on fleets of trucks on the roads driving it around. So really I'm interested in an update, please, on the existing rail system, the proposed light rail systems, and the possibility that they might in fact be electric.
Thank you. We do have a freight rail network in Tasmania from Hobart through and across as far as Burnie, and other lines that run from Railton down here to the port of Devonport, and also one from the west coast up to the port of Burnie, which brings mineral concentrates mainly. So we have a single operator on that at the moment in Tasrail, and they provide a rail freight service there. And I've got to admit to not being entirely up with the detail of who would move your hempcrete from the south of the state to the north.
No, the other way.
The other way. But I'm sure it could be done by rail somehow, and I'd be happy to take your number, and then get my office to chase up who you could speak to about getting freight on rail. Light rail, there has been some policy announcements recently and a partnership, I think it is, between the government and the Heritage Transport Group in Hobart about investigating light rail links down there. And then there are other parts of the rail network in Tasmania which are not currently in use and don't have a date where they're expected to be in demand again for freight use. And we've built legislation specifically to protect those corridors from being lost as well, so that we are rail banking in unused portions of our network, so that our rail easements, if you like, those corridors are preserved for the future. Or it could be a change of technology that says rail is now ready to play a different role in our economy again. So we're not losing those opportunities, but for your immediate freight task north-south, find who to speak to in Tasrail about getting you a room in a box.
I'd be more concerned about getting them electrified, but perhaps we'll come back in a decade and renew it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add a couple comments. I'm actually relatively new to the electric vehicle charging industry, so this is putting on my personal hat as Roy. I spent 15 years in rail, actually, and electrified rail. So I worked as a consultant for many years, and I worked for Siemens for 10 years in Canada and Australia in the public rail sector. And one of the first things I thought about when I joined this electric vehicle charging business was, why can New South Wales, for example, spend $15 billion on a new metro line and can't even put $50 million towards electric vehicle charging? And you have to look at it from economies of scale and understand the thousands of people that are transported on a metro line like that. And when you take it down to the individual level, it actually makes sense. Probably the greatest cost right now, and I just one comment about that, is corridor preservation. If corridors can be preserved, it will save millions of dollars later down the line. If corridors are not preserved, it just increases the cost later, either through land acquisition, through tunneling, through bridges, etc. So all I can say is preserve the corridors as much as you can now, and the electrified rail will come. And one convergence between, let's say, the EV business and the rail side of it is wireless trams is basically the way the technology is going. So most new light rail systems are coming with onboard battery systems that can be supercharged. So there's a bit of convergence of the technologies between the two industries.
All our rail networks will become bike tracks, so they'll be there forever. Councillor Richardson from Meander Valley.
Thanks. Panel, I've got 3 questions, a couple of them are very, one comment and 2 questions. And the questions are of a practical nature. Firstly, a comment, and there was a wonderful one-liner letter to the editor in one of the local papers in relation to political attitudes to things, and it invited a certain member of the current federal government to turn around and face the future. Which I thought was a wonderful comment. But the 2 practical things, the first one is, I guess it's directed to Roger. In terms of implementation of much of the charging stations and the rest of it, there is a key element that I think is missing on your working party. It's my tip that a very high proportion of the charging stations are going to be put in with the cooperation and even the finance of local government. I notice that's missing from your working party.
It might have just been missing from my list.
All right.
I believe that LGAT is on it. Yes, Clive, nodding. So, my bad. You're right. Next.
Thank you for that. And the next one relates to the commercial reality of charging stations. I don't know what's happening overseas, but I'd be happy to know about it. Basically, if some infrastructure is put in, there's an expectation of the ratepayers or the taxpayers that there will be a commercial return on that investment. I guess in caravan parks, it's a coin in the slot for a shower or a washing machine. Is that the way that is happening overseas, and is that the way it's likely to happen here?
I guess I'll speak to that. What you're seeing now is mature markets developing, and you're starting to see multiple networks being stratification across all this charging ecosystem. So the future in Australia will probably be multiple networks, each of them giving different offerings. The offerings could be everything from speed of charge to dollars, and that's on the public charging network. At the end of the day, anybody, of course, can always charge at home and should charge at home. That is going to be the majority of charging. And EV readiness of your home infrastructure is something that, that we need to promote. But at least in the public space, you are going to get that stratification. And yes, there is an expectation of business returns, and you are seeing investments happening around the world. Shell Oil, of all companies, bought one of the charging networks in Europe recently called New Motion, and are integrating them within their petrol stations. So everybody's trying to find a place in this future infrastructure. You've got the petrol retailers, you've got, anybody can be a fuel retailer in the future for EV charging, you've got the energy companies. So everybody's trying to find their space, and on one hand, this is good. We'll have the law of supply and demand and economics, and there will be effective, cost-effective charging available in the future in the public. There's no doubt about that.
Isn't it great to hear Councillor Richardson concerned about the ratepayers straight away? Keep going,
I'll just quickly add to that. So when we put the RAC electric highway in, we sort of said, okay, it'll be free for anyone to use for the first year, but after that we'll start charging. And it was quite interesting. We'll start billing. So while it was free, people tolerated downtime. People tolerated the machine not working, or there was a quirk with the machine and you needed to restart it. While it was free, that was okay. When you start being charged 46 cents a kilowatt hour and the bloody thing doesn't work, you get rightly upset. And I think making sure that the machines are as bulletproof as possible is obviously critical if you're going to start charging money for it. Something we've often advocated is, why don't you charge for parking? You know, if it costs you to park your car somewhere for a certain amount of time, then it wouldn't be that different. Granted, that penalises smaller capacity EVs or vehicles that don't have fast onboard charging, but there are ways around it. There's lots of different ways of extracting money from people to pay for the electricity. But the reality is electricity is cheap and the infrastructure is expensive. So it's not easy.
The day will come and there'll be a priority lane on the TT ship where you can park your EV. Pauline?
I don't know whether people are aware of how expensive it can be to charge, but you know, we came from Adelaide. Our highest ever was when we went to a caravan park in Launceston, and the woman tried to charge us an overnight stay at $45 to recharge for 3 hours. I don't know if anyone can exceed that, but in our travels, that was the highest. We actually turned it around and you know, got around it, but that was pretty classic.
Did you get a free bottle of wine with that?
Yeah, she said it was because of occupational health and safety. Even though we were Big Four members, that's right, she would take it down to something $41 because we were Big Four members. Of course it was occupational health and safety.
Evidently, if a visitor comes in and brings a car with a power cord, someone might trip over it, and because we've got public liability on a car, we can't go into their park because their public liability is not necessary, etc., etc. Anyway, the question I had was the vehicles, electric vehicles, are usually powered by solar on most electric vehicle car houses. There's been nothing mentioned about the possibility of extracting that energy, so you don't need a power cord to the mainland. And also, we're all on the ground with this. Isn't there any electric aeroplanes yet?
Said the people from Sejuna where petrol is 186 cents a litre. Yeah, I'll go to the young lady, sir, and then I'll get you to pass it through to him.
Not so young. From Adelaide also. I just wanted to make some comments about the cost of charging en route from Adelaide and from previous long distance. Yes, it can be a coin in a slot at a caravan park if you pre-arrange. It might be as little as $1.20 per hour for charging, could be $5 per charge, $10 per charge we found in some places en route, so we stayed there
as long as possible to make use of it. And other places, yes, it was the overnight fee regardless of how long we were there. But in terms of the council, and since arriving here a week ago and finding that the craft fair, though fantastic, occupied the Deloraine Showground site, so we couldn't charge, I had to improvise at the panel beaters next to the visitor centre. He doesn't like cash, he prefers beer, for the record. And I also arranged at the Beaconsfield Mine site, which again, a museum, which is a perfect place to have electric car charging. I was told that the switchboard behind the barbecues was probably unlocked and there was possibly a 15 amp socket there. So I did plug in. I plugged in for an hour and a half there to use it. I actually didn't technically need to. I had arranged to get back to Launceston. But the point I want to make, particularly to the councillor that just asked the question, is whilst I was in Beaconsfield, I paid to tour the mine. I did some shopping at the IGA supermarket for my dinner, and I went to the souvenir shop and bought some lovely Tindo Tasmanian bowls to take home. Ditto in Deloraine. So that even though your ratepayers might question the cost, the minimal cost, and unless it's a Tesla that's absolutely empty, the minimal cost of the electricity, there are other benefits to the town, particularly in Tasmania, which are a lot of tourism towns. And that when someone's charging an electric car, you've got that captive customer for a longer period of time than someone with a petrol car.
Could I just quickly add to that? Gold Coast just paid millions of dollars to have some, award ceremony in the Gold Coast to bring people to the Gold Coast. This is no different. We might be a small minority right now, but we're growing.
Yeah, that's something we made a point of with the RAC Electric Highway. We made sure that the chargers were put in at the Information Bureau or next to the Cappuccino Strip and not in some dingy servo on the outskirts of town. So I can't think of any.
Don't talk about Beaconsfield like
that. My question's for Sarah. You put up a slide which was quite informative about even the optimistic projections of EVs versus what you would need to do to meet the Paris targets. How is that calculated, and where do you see? So I work in the renewable electricity space, and it's very frustrating because that is really the cheapest and most effective way to reduce emissions, is to move to renewable energy. And vehicles, I suspect, are somewhere in between, but I'm interested in your assumptions as to, is that pro rata, or is that getting, is electric vehicles going to do more of the contribution or less?
So that's an International Energy Agency projection. I haven't looked at all of the methodology. It's based on some type of economic model where the world implements policies and technologies to reduce emissions in the most cost-effective way possible. So electric vehicles would be filling whatever portion of the emissions reduction target is cost-effective for them to be doing as opposed to other sectors.
We need a stunt, Roger, in Parliament. Can you get Will Hodgman to hold up a glass of water and shake it? Just to remind people where our power comes from.
Pete Gordon from southern New South Wales. I was rather alarmed to find just recently, and I haven't been able to find a source to verify it, but I understand that Australia now only carries 2 weeks of fossil fuel capability, so petrol, diesel, oil, etc., etc. Something that I think we all need to take away, and we need to be, if we can find a source for it, we need to be able to cite that and say, with electric vehicles, electric trains, electric ferries and electric cars and bikes, that we will never suffer from not being able to generate that electricity, particularly in Tasmania. 2 weeks, it's not very long. Look at all the trucks that go up and down the Hume Highway and across the Nullarbor.
That number's correct.
But I can't find the source.
It was in an ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics data sheet. I can dig it up for you. Yeah. It's scary, but it's true. Yeah.
We're just lucky New Zealand doesn't want to attack us. We wouldn't be able to defend ourselves. Like the rugby union again. Always coming second. Tim, I'll get Tim. Real questions now, ladies and gentlemen, no political statements.
Okay. Hopefully this will be a real question. A variety of people have said that Australia has the least, perhaps, EV incentives of all or most of the developed countries at present. I'm just really interested in why that is. Clearly, when incentives are there and they're done right, they work. Norway, I think just last month, was closing on 50% of vehicles, and Sarah mentioned 28% overall, I think, for the year. So if they're done well, they work incredibly well. But we don't have that sort of leadership at all the levels of government where it's needed. At the state level, you could do a lot with registration, especially fringe benefits tax, all sorts of things that could be done at a federal level. And Australians, we know, get hugely behind tech. We're wonderful on iPhones. We love solar panels. There was a lot of incentives early on in the solar panel side from the federal government. So the question is, I guess, why hasn't this happened? How can we make it happen? And perhaps one very small suggestion, maybe the only way is if we get shamed by New Zealand. We hate being beaten by New Zealand, and almost as much as they love beating us. But that's what's happening at the moment on a lot of the infrastructure and the moves on EVs. We really desperately do need to do something. So perhaps to Roger first, but all panel members, why hasn't it happened?
I think the solar rebates showed the federal government just how keen people are to embrace the technology, and I think it cost them what they're expecting to pay. I think that's what is preventing them from offering a rebate or a cash incentive. The other thing is that if you're already in the market for a $40,000 car, you're probably not the kind of household that needs a $10,000 sweetener. And I think you've got to be careful you're not playing the politics of envy with rebates like that. I think the government is understandably cautious about that, but I might hand over to either of you if you know of any main reasons why they don't want to do it other than they just don't want to do it.
You can see how that if you wait long enough, you don't have to. I think they're doing that.
Yeah, I think it's partially that I think Australia is a technology taker and that we can follow other countries lead in this space. Obviously not ideal in terms of making sure that we meet our Paris commitments, but yeah, I think that's possibly where it's coming from. I think I'm going to do a little plug here. I think interestingly, in terms of the getting interested in technology space, I think governments actually get a lot more excited about things like autonomous vehicles. I'm not sure why. I think maybe it's part of that, like, you know, yeah. But I think, yeah, there's the potential, because I think a lot of people think about autonomous vehicles and they're like, oh, that's such cool technology. They don't realise that it's extremely likely that those vehicles will be electric and we probably need to sort that out first. So I think that's potentially an avenue to get in there. There's a growing consensus that the future of technology, for it to be most environmentally friendly, should be shared, electric and autonomous. And we've actually got a webinar coming up next week on Thursday at 11 AM. If anyone wants to listen in, you can find the registration on the Climate Works Twitter page, or just come talk to me and I can send you an email. Small plug.
Just one comment as a former Canadian, now Australian, but I follow Canada quite closely still, and there's a lot of analogies between Canada and Australia, and the Canadian EV uptake is actually quite significant, which sometimes surprises me because of cold weather concerns, etc. But it's surprising, and all I can say is it's within the populace, it's within the voters to vote in governments that want those policies. So at the end of the day, the government is beholden to what the voters want, and you have to make it issues, and yes, you have to start at the local level of the council, but it is a political issue at the end of the day, and if the government's voted with those policies, then it will happen. And I have to do another shout out to New Zealand, and we've got our New Zealand colleagues. The speech from the throne, which I was reading this morning, promoted electric vehicles for all government fleets, and that was a government policy. And it's not that hard, but obviously, yeah, it starts with the voters. That's my view.
Because this was at least partly directed to me, I'll respond. There's lots of different models of incentives and assistances and things like that, and it does come down to this group of people helping to make a change which is being taken up by this group of people for whom it's too expensive at the moment. There's a lot of maths in that, and it's very hit and miss, and it's a complex sort of science there. I'm quite interested, as well as looking at those types of things, what other opportunities does the particular cost structure of buying and running EVs present in terms of things like leasing and financing products? Because if you've got a car that costs $40,000 but then costs nothing to run, never needs maintenance apparently, there's a lot of people who'd love to get this but can't afford this. And is there a way of smoothing that across the life of the vehicle to a point where people can manage it in their cash flow? And is there a player in the industry emerging who is saying, we don't sell cars anymore, we lease them, and that somehow we've got a thing which is associated with where you swipe your card to power up. If that's not at home, that we charge you back for that. I mean, it could be an energy company that does a car manufacturer. And then there's an interesting proposition in somewhere like Tasmania. If we were to have a significant government electric vehicle fleet, which is under lease management, and then release them into the market, maybe they go into the normal auction system and they become a second-hand car. But I'd be interested to know if our working group can search the world for examples of where there's been some sort of new type of lease thing, which lets ordinary people get into a electric vehicle and somehow pay for it per charge, so that it's not hugely different to their normal cash flow rate. They don't have to reorganise themselves around it. It becomes different entirely. And forest bikes and things like that have had mixed success in different places, but I'm interested in seeing what those are like as well, because the benefit of the cheap running costs, if we can bring that forward and that becomes part of the barrier, dealing with the barrier to entry, maybe incentives for the uptake don't need to be there. You just respond to the market a different way.
Is that like the mobile phones? Your mobile phone, you just pay it. 2 years later, you give the phone, you can get the next one.
So through Aurora then?
Yeah.
To a certain degree, those concepts are being addressed by the mobility as a service concept, which is out there, which is really, forward thinking. But who's not here is the Go-Gets and the car share organizations of the world, and that's effectively where they're trying to take it. Now, I know this audience here, we're all personal car owners, and we've grown up with that. But if you talk to those organizations, that's the future. And for those cars to be electric and be converted, and for us not to own cars and are just paying for it as a service, that is one model of the future. I'm not saying it's going to be the model for everything, but those concepts are very much in discussion, and yeah, I'm sure many of us can talk about that in the background, but that is one potential future.
Yes, fantastic point. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have a big hand for Sarah Fumei, Roy Unni, Chris Jones and Roger Jaensch. Roger has to go off to a meeting because, for those of you who are from the mainland who don't know this, we have a 1 gigabit connection now here. So be assured, when it talks about disruption, there is an opportunity for Tasmania to do it first, fast and furious. And I hope Roger, as the Parliamentary Secretary for removing small red tape matters, that we don't do it like the NBN. Okay? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll break for lunch for an hour and enjoy some of this wonderful weather. Thank you for your attention. And